Smash!
Hey, today I'm going to show you how to paint the main two factions of Quar. We have the Coftyr and the Crusaders. The methods I'm using for each side are efficient time-wise as well as paint-wise, but they don't really sacrifice quality all too much. Now, of course, I encourage you to go into as much detail as you wish, but I think these are good building blocks. Now, before I go any further, this is a double upload day. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, what the hell is Quar, like I was just a few weeks ago, I made a video dedicated to getting people introduced to the lore, world building, and the wargame. If you'd like to check that out afterwards, I'd greatly appreciate it. Also, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like what you see, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. You get some extra goodies, get to see my videos early, get access to exclusive channels in the official Discord server, and it really just supports the channel. Huge thank you to my channel members. You guys mean the world to me. But enough flapping of the gums, let's get to the paint list. Now recently, I got my mitts on a bunch of the new Army Painter Fanatics. They're kind of the predominant paint I'm using for this tutorial. Also, it forced me to very lazily throw together a new paint indicator. But now that you've gotten a good look at the paints list, and feel free to come back if you wish, let's get to painting the Crusader first. Alrighty, as you can see, I've Zenithal primed the miniature with a little bit of bold titanium white and some black. To begin the miniature, I'd apply 2 thin coats of olive drab from the Army Painter Fanatic line to all of the fatigues. This mostly just being his shirt. Over a Zenithal Prime, this is pretty seamless. You almost only really need 1 coat, but I would do 2. Next for his little sock guards, I'd apply some skeleton bone. I'm actually a little inconsistent with this when it comes to my little squad. For some of them I use leafy green, I just prefer the skeleton bone look a little bit better. But I like having a little bit of a mixture, as the Crusader army is a lot more rank and file. Supply chains might not be up to date, and you might have some different fatigues. I also end up doing this for some of the helmets too, but we'll talk about that later. For his boots, I'm using some onyx skin. While editing, I kind of realized that I used the same colors for the boots on the Cofty side and the Crusader side, but I'll leave the steps in regardless. Next, for all of the little leather elements, I'm going to be using warm brown from Proacryl. Just be sure to really take your time in applying this. If you mess up, it's not the end of the world. Olive drab covers really well. I just found it to be good practice for good brush control, and with actually wanting to paint a squad of these guys, I don't really want to go back and fix too many things. And hey, don't get me wrong, I like painting the fatigues. It's just that the skin tones are my favorite part of these little guys. Next for his collar, I'm using wild green. Part of me kind of wishes I painted the little rolled up sleeves the same color, but I like it regardless. It's just a little nitpick of mine. Another thing to mention while painting this, I'm trying my best not to hit any of the skin on the Quar. It really doesn't matter because I'm not using any contrast colors over these guys, but if you are planning on using contrasts, all the more reason to be careful. Next, for all the metallic elements on the miniature, I'm going to be base coating using warm brown mixed with a little bit of black. The most obvious metallic element is the gun, and we're also going to be painting in the little knee guards or whatever they're supposed to be. I'm not quite sure. I think the way I painted them was a little weird. I like to have them kind of poking out from the sock guards. I didn't really paint a strap around them. If you wish to do so, be my guest. We'll also be applying this color to the helmet, but first we're going to be applying a little bit of warm brown to the butt of the gun. Another thing that I love about the Quar models is all their weapons are fitted with wood furniture. I already really like doing this with my Cadian miniatures, so this is right up my alley. Like I alluded to previously, we're just going to be painting the helmet in the same way. I didn't end up painting the leather strap on the top of the helmet. That's kind of optional. Again, I kind of fiddle with different styles of painting helmets. Next to paint his little knapsack, I ended up painting it using a little bit of skeleton bone. Probably should have mentioned it previously, but whatever. I usually paint them with an assortment of drab colors, but I feel like the skeleton bone on the top and bottom works best. Next, for all the metallic elements, I'm painting them using some gunmetal. Just be sure to thinly apply this, don't use too much to gunk up any details. Obvious bits we're going to be applying this to are the helmet and the gun, but we'll also be applying this to the shin guards and to some of the little buckles around the model. Next, to shade the model, I'm using an all-over wash of Battle Mud Wash from 2 thin coats. Now, I know this paint is a little hard to get in the US nowadays. I just prefer this paint over Agrax as it kind of leaves a more consistent matte finish. But if you want to use Agrax, if you want to use any of Vallejo's inks, that's a perfectly good option. Just be sure to wick this into every nook and cranny on the model, make sure that there's no pooling, make sure it's not drying in a weird way. Again, I'm trying not to hit the skin tones, it's not the end of the world if you do. Again, it's kind of a discipline thing. Now to paint his skin, I'm using some Talisman Teal. Like I kind of mentioned previously, one of my favorite parts of painting Quar is their wacky skin tones. They can be muted colors, they can be bombastic colors, and for this guy, I decided that teal would be a great option. I also ended up shading this guy, unfortunately off camera because I got too excited. I just used some Kulia green shade entirely over the flesh. Don't fret too much, I plan on making a video entirely dedicated to painting Quar flesh. Once that's dried, I'd come back to the fatigues and I'm just re-highlighting over all the raised surfaces using some olive green. This is the beauty of this scheme. Olive drab is a relatively bright color on its own, so after shading the initial base coat, all I really have to do is reapply it on the highlights. If I want them to be brighter, I just apply a little bit more. Also, for any areas that are more shaded, I can add in little sketchy lines to simulate kind of stress and tear on the fabric. If you want to take it a step further and maybe mix it with some skeleton horde or something like that, be my guest, but I think this looks amazing for a squad. Now coming back to the Quar flesh, I'm applying some night sky in little dots. Now you'll notice that I'm using bigger dots, and in between those I'm adding in smaller ones. Honestly kind of similar to giraffe spots. Now something cool that I want to mention is that Quar end up having more spots the older they are. With this dude, I want him to be kind of a middle-aged Quar. A thing I had to learn when painting on the little dots for Quar flesh is I don't want to go too thin with it. Obviously you don't want to go too thick with it as it'll create some texture that you don't really want. But with it being thin, I found it to be kind of tedious when reapplying it over and over again. Just be sure to kind of hit that nice midpoint of milky consistency with your paint. Now, coming back to the collar, I think you're going to get the idea with how I paint the rest of the model by this point. I'm just reapplying some wild green again to the raised surfaces of the collar, and if you want, you can sketch on little bits of highlights, just to kind of focus in and adding in a little bit of texture and sketchiness to it. But with these bright colors, all you really need is to re-highlight using the base color. Again, coming back to the satchel and all the sock guards, I'm using some skeleton bone. Again, I'm just reapplying that nice little thin texture along the knapsack. Now when it comes to the sock guards, I would not do this too much. Because the sock guards are already so textured, I just suggest adding this to the highlights and the raised surfaces. Coming back to the leather, I'm applying a mixture of burning ore along with the warm brown, so I am kind of deviating from using the same base tone as a highlight. I do mix it a little bit. I'd also apply a little bit of onyx flesh to this mixture as well, mostly just the sharpest edges of the leather. With the metallics, I'm now going to be using some metallic silver from Vallejo Game Color. With the belt buckle, I'm just going around the sharpest edges, and I'm just feathering in little bits to add a little bit of texture, maybe it's beat up. We'll also be applying this to the gun, mostly to the area where the light is catching it. I want the bayonet to look a little bit sharper. I would also suggest using a little bit of Black Templar over the guns if you want to. I haven't quite gone through with it yet, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about. And of course, we'll also be highlighting the helmet. Now for the helmet, I think I should have dry brushed over this using my tester's dry brush. The texture and more sporadic scratches would look better, but with the flesh already being painted, I felt like it was a little too risky. I'd add in little freehand scratches. It's a little harder to do it with the Crusader helmets because there's only so much surface area that's raised. But regardless, I like how it looks. Now for our final step on this little dude, I'm going to be applying some burning ore into the spots on his face. I'll go into more detail when I get to the flesh painting tutorial, but I think a fundamental of painting Quar spots is it's really good to have a contrasting color between the main flesh and these little spots. Orange and teal look so good together, and you don't really have to go crazy with the splotches. If they're a little bit more faded, it actually looks a little bit more realistic. If you want to go bold with them, I also think that looks really cool. It's just about adding a little bit more character to each individual guy. Again, I love the Your Dudes element to wargaming. But with that, I have a wonderful looking little Crusader. I'm basing him using my mud-based technique. I actually have a short for that if you want to check that out. But up against his other comrades, he looks amazing. Something I also just want to mention is that a lot of the Quar actually have hand-painted symbols to identify their rank. For me, that seems a bit much, not discouraging anyone from doing so, but I've been painting the rims of my bases of my men to signify their rank. Black for riflers, red for millwares, and yellow for yaudrils. But with the Crusader finished, we can now move on to the Coftyr. First, we'll base coat the entirety of his fatigues using some Gothic blue. Like before, we're going to be avoiding his trousers. We're just applying this to the sweater. This paint is super opaque, you could get away with one coat, but I suggest two. Now you're probably seeing similarities if you've watched the Crusader portion, but for the pants we're going to be using skeleton bone once more. This time, however, we're also going to be focusing this color on the little cuffs, his sleeves, as well as the scarf or turtleneck, whatever you want to call it. Now again, like the Crusader, we're going to be painting all the leather using some warm brown. If you want to use some different colors like Rhinox hide to differentiate it, that's totally fine. In fact, I have a short dedicated to painting more detailed leather, so if you want to try that, be my guest. I just felt like limiting the amount of paints I used for this tutorial. You also want to paint in this little satchel thing on the backpack. I'd also paint the little handle to it using some skeleton bone. But coming back to the trousers, he has these little knee guards, and I wanted to paint them using skeleton bone as well, as the next color we'll be using to paint them is World War II Japanese uniform by Vallejo Model Color. I know this is a very specific color. A good alternative for this color would be Barren Dune by Army Painter Fanatic. I'd also add just a little bit of yellow to make it more ochre. We'll also be painting the uniform color over the little backpack satchel. I am not really bothering to paint the inside, as the shade we'll be applying later on will fill that in just fine. Next for his knapsack, I'm using a little bit of Basilisk Red. Doesn't exactly matter what color you paint this, it can be any sort of color you like. I just think that the Basilisk Red plays really well with the blue and the kind of yellowish tone that the uniform is giving. Now coming back to the boots, just like the Crusader, I'm painting them using onyx flesh. You'll probably also notice that I didn't highlight these on the Crusader. I'm not going to be doing it for the Coftyran as well. I just don't really see any point in it. It's going to be buried in the terrain anyway, and it'll look fine. If you really want to highlight it, I'd suggest just using some more onyx flesh mixed with a little bit of tan. Next we have the metallics, and you could use the same paints that I used for the previous miniature, being the black mixed with warm brown. But for the Coftyran, I decided to use some glossy black. This gives a much more shiny undertone, and it's just more fitting for the Coftyrans. They have a much higher budget, they're going to have shinier armor. Though I do kind of go for a more beat-around look with the armor just because that's my personal preference. Also for simplicity's sake, I'm applying this to the gun as well as the bottom of the boots. Just be careful when applying it, you don't want to spill this at all, I really don't want to clean up this color. The glossy finish kind of makes it harder to paint over, so just be careful with that. Before we get to the metallic elements, I'm going to paint the understrap of the helmet using some uniform gray from Army Painter Fanatic. Now to apply the metallics, I'm using some gunmetal once more. I'm doing my best to be very gentle when applying this, I don't want to apply this sloppily. I kind of do that with the boots, but especially the helmet, I don't want any deformations in the actual design. Which I kind of go against anyway, I do kind of go for a beat-around look with the helmet overall. But when it comes to the boots, I kind of sloppily apply this on, and I would clean up using some onyx flesh afterwards. Just try not to be as sloppy as I am. Now once the metallic is dried, give it a good long while to dry by the way, you'll apply some more Battle Mud Wash all over the entirety of the miniature. Again, try to avoid the flesh tones, try to avoid the face. It's not the end of the world if you go over his little face, it's just convenience. Once the shade was dry, I would very, very carefully dry brush over the helmet using some Vallejo Game Color Silver Metallic. I talked about this earlier with the Crusader by dry brushing over, but with the Crusader, I had already painted his face. So dry brushing over, even if I did spill any metallics, I didn't notice. I'd also apply this color very gently using my brush, kind of adding in more scratches, as well as filling in any buttons, any sort of decorative elements that I want to add on to the miniature. Coming back to the main uniform, I'm mixing some Gothic blue with Barren blue. I would kind of differentiate how much I would use to highlight. I'm not going to be doing the same thing I did with the Crusader where I just used the olive drab to highlight the uniform. I want to mix a little bit of that Barren blue in with the Gothic blue, because I kind of want to bring back a little bit of that classic Cofty baby blue that they usually wear. while also maintaining that element of the dark blue. On the sharpest highlights, it's roughly a 1 to 3 Gothic blue to Baron blue, just on the sharpest details. Coming back to the cuff sleeves and the trousers, I'm re-highlighting using some skeleton bone like I did with the Crusader. I really want to be careful when applying this. The details in the cuffs and in the trousers are very fine, so I really don't want to spill over. Coming back to the little knee pads, I'm mixing together a little bit of skeleton bone with the World War II uniform. Just a little bit of the bone color will make the World War II uniform pop a little bit better. Using it on its own, it's not sufficient in my opinion. Coming back to the knapsack, just reapply some of that basilisk red. Simply feathering on the highlights really makes this look realistic. It actually looks like cloth in my opinion. It kind of looks cozy. So I did say I didn't want to differentiate the leather too much, but I'm highlighting using a mixture of burning ore 1-to-1 with onyx flesh, 1-to-1 with warm brown. Reason I'm doing this is I want to make the leather look a little bit more varnished, a little bit better taken care of as opposed to the Crusader army. I'm sure looking at it, even like for a prolonged period of time, you wouldn't notice the difference, but I think maybe just implanting that idea into your head makes it look cooler. Using my hypnosis to program your mind with context. To highlight the furniture on the gun, I'm using a little bit of warm brown mixed with skeleton bone. I just wanted to mix it up a little bit, doesn't really matter all too much. You could use the same as the leather and I think it would look fine. I just think that using a little bit more of a tan color feels more wood-like. Just be careful not to highlight over any of the metallics. Speaking of the metallics, I decided to go back in using some metallic silver as I felt like it wasn't polished enough and there wasn't enough detail to satiate my little brain. I would use a lot more on the pendant on the front, and I would add more manual highlights and scratches onto the helmet. I'd also highlight the little belt buckle. Now again, for my favorite part of painting Quar, I'm going to paint this guy's flesh using dragon red. I really love this color, and I think it's a really good color to differentiate this guy as my leader. It applies so smoothly over the Zenithal Prime I had going on, and though I was going to leave it at dragon red, I decided to add in just a little bit of burning ore to the dragon red, just to give him a little bit of a brighter pop. It's kind of a thick glaze, I would count this more so as a layering, but you get the idea. Now to paint his spots, I decided to mix some night sky 1-to-1 with basilisk red. Kinda gives us this dark purple, it's kinda muted, and I really like how this fits in on this really bright red. I want to add more spots to this guy as I want him to look a little bit older. Given his rank, I feel like a little bit more seniority is warranted, but like I mentioned with the Crusader, just simply paint it the same way a giraffe would have spots. Or don't, there's a trillion ways you can paint Quar flesh. Again, I'm going to do a video on that. Now after applying this first round of spots, I decided to fill in the spots using some warped yellow. I really love this color, it's kind of a moon cheese-esque yellow. And when we start filling in the bigger spots, he ends up kind of looking like a strawberry. The red and the yellow work so well together, and those little undertone spots really make it pop out. Admittedly, it's even a little sloppier than I normally would paint them on, but I think it works. It feels it catches your attention, I don't know. But once I was happy with the flesh, our final step will be adding just a little bit of snakebite leather to the front end of the pendant. This being the Coftyr symbol, I'm just painting the lower half. But with that final step, my Coftyr Yadril is complete, and I love how this looks. The Crusaders are a little bit more simplistic, but they're incredibly satisfying to paint because of that simplicity. But the Coftyrans are a little bit more difficult, and it's very rewarding. At the end of the day, I'm really happy with both of these little dudes. These are just really fun models to paint, and I have a lot of ideas on things I want to do to kit bash them, paint them in different styles, I don't know. Hopefully these two videos have convinced you to give Quar a try. It really is an amazing universe, and it's just a really fun wargame. I think a lot of us are a little tired of the financial ball-busting GW is delivering, so I think it's about time that some older and newer wargames get their flowers. But I've definitely flapped my beak enough for one video. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more if you liked what you saw, share it with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kit bash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.